Well, early unwanted pregnancy perpetuates poverty and it disrupts the growth and development of our young people. It also contributes to the worrying dropout rate that we are fighting so hard to reduce. These are just some of the concerns highlighted by the Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, when she briefed the media yesterday on her department's response to the COVID pandemic and the learning losses in the basic education sector since the start of the pandemic last year. Now, the Minister also announced that they will intensify the implementation of the Comprehensive Sexuality Education, which aims to empower young people with age-appropriate information. Now, there is so much to discuss and analyse here on some of the matters raised by the Department of Basic Education. So we're joined by Professor Mary Metcalfe, who's a Senior Research Associate at the University of Johannesburg. Good to have you, Prof. Thanks very, very much again for your time.
Thank you, Leanne. Good to talk to you again.
So over a year on, what has research shown on the impact of COVID-19 on education, and particularly here when we talk about the poorer sectors of communities? I mean, from what I'm gathering and what I heard the Minister saying, it really seems to have reversed the progress that has been made in the development of learners.
You're right, Leanne. You've already raised the issue that this affects learners differentially, depending on what resources they have to learn from home when they're not at school. But the very detailed report given by the department yesterday showed several things that are very important. Firstly, that so much time has been lost. And the time that is lost is made, the learning losses are greater than the time lost. Because for every day that learners are not in school, they also are forgetting what they were learning the few days before. So there's a lot of time lost, the learning loss is greater. And the next thing that I think is very important is that the DBE was speaking very clearly about the dangers of teachers rushing in such a way that they leave learners behind. That the focus of what teachers need to be doing is consolidating learning, not just making sure that they've taught whether or not learners have learned. Those were, I think, for me, the very big takeaways. The fourth one is that the catch-up of time lost is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Professor Gustafsson said that we have to remember that it's the matrics in 10 years who are now in the early grades of primary school, and their results will be impacted upon if we don't catch up. Now, the catch-up is going to be several years of hard work for everyone, because it's not just finding as much time as we can. It's not just making sure that as many learners as possible attend every day as is possible relative to the space. But it's making sure that teachers understand what learners haven't learned and teach to what learners need, which is going to be very demanding on teachers over the next few years.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it's very, very worrisome when you look and we hear about some of the calculations as to how much time and learning time has been lost, because that's something we need to look at, and catching that up, and as you're saying, at a pace that perhaps the children are not understanding is detrimental to them. I mean, when we see figures and the Minister basically saying that we've lost close on 50 and 70% of learning in 2020, and now already 50% has been lost in 2021. I mean, we are lagging so behind at the moment, and we're talking to a massive part of the population, because a very small part has got access to online and has been able to continue, and this, of course, is making that gap bigger, but we'll get to that conversation a bit later. But, you know, catching up this work, how do we go about doing something like that in a way that the learners can actually understand it and grasp it and not just brush it aside?
There was an excellent presentation by Cheryl Weston from the DBE at the presentation yesterday. And what she described is that the department has already taken steps to focus in their guidance to teachers on core concepts that must be mastered. So they have firstly trimmed some of the topics that could perhaps be used to further explain a concept, but they've said teachers don't need to teach that. You need to reduce on a central set of ideas relative to that grade and to that subject. They also have reduced the number of subjects that are taught in the senior phase, and I think that gives us a direction for the way forward. In primary schools, the whole school needs to focus on literacy and numeracy. If our children can read, they will be able to much more confidently work at home in mastering learning across other subjects. So I really strongly feel that instead of rushing and crowding learners with the stress of feeling that they must catch up, we must focus on the core learning subjects. Primary school, it's literacy and numeracy. And in secondary school, we need to also have teachers who can look at what needs to be covered, look at what the time available is, look at where the learners are, and then focus on the core learning that will provide the foundation for subsequent years.
My concern is, you look at the amount of time that's been lost this year already, and then the announcement coming through yesterday from the minister saying that holidays will go as planned, i.e. the October break will go ahead as planned, even though we've seen a lot of time lost and a lot of this time of learners sitting at home and not doing anything. Do you think this was a wise call? I know there's a big balancing act between unions and school governing bodies and the like, but at the end of the day, it's the children at the center of it all, and they will be the ones missing out. What do you think about keeping these holidays and not scrapping them?
Leanne, I really think that in this many-year battle that we have with COVID, because COVID's going to be with us not only this year, it's still going to be with us next year, is that we've got to keep our eye on the big picture. And we've got to take stakeholders, unions, parents, all of the teachers with us. And that means we've got to have our eye on the ball of a multi-year catch-up. Maximize time, yes, but this holiday period, it would have been a saving of 3 or 4 days. I wouldn't sacrifice the need for teachers to have a break, for school leaders to have a break, for 3 or 4 days. We need to say we're behind you. We understand the huge commitment that you're showing, huge commitment. I'm not sure if you were able to listen to the DG's presentation at the end of the conference, but he was saying he's amazed when he goes out to schools in rural areas, even on Saturdays. Primary schools are trying to catch up time. Yeah. Now, all of these efforts to catch up time have to be applauded. We have to encourage, but we have to support. We have to understand the huge stresses. And I am pleased that the minister decided not to try and force for those 3 or 4 days that it would have been in the end. I understood the motivation because we do need to maximize time, but we have to take everyone with us because it's so demanding on schools, it's so demanding on teachers, and we need to make them know that we're behind them, we're supporting them, making sure that they have some of the rest period that learners and teachers need in those short breaks.
Yeah. No, thanks for the explanation, because that is something that I think a lot of people are speaking about this morning, saying, why? But I suppose when you do put it in that manner, you can understand the hard work that's been going in to these, while they have been at school and a break is needed. But one of the big worries, again, and like you say, we're going to be with COVID for quite some time. But we're seeing what's happening. For instance, let's give the Northern Cape as an example, recording 339 new cases, which included 36 educators, and this is the number we're looking at now, 289 learners and 14 support staff members at schools. What impact does this have on the learning and well-being of other learners as well? Because this is a big problem, is that we're seeing that the infections are very much so centered in schools, and closing them again could be detrimental.
Okay, so the science here is quite important, because all of the research that I've been exposed to, and which Professor Gustafsson spoke about yesterday, indicates that there's no greater incidence of school infection than community infection. When schools open and close, it doesn't have an effect on infection in the surrounding areas, which shows that there may be infections happening within schools, but they're more likely to be coming from the normal life that learners and teachers are living. So whether you're at school or whether you're at home, you may be exposed to possible infection in the same way, if that makes sense. And I think that learners are safer in school because schools are a controlled environment. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it is an anxious time for schools to manage infection, but we know that, number one, the risks of severe illness increase with age, that younger children are less likely to become seriously ill than older people. Therefore, schools are places that, if we manage the environment, follow the protocols, maximize physical distancing, make sure that learners mask, understand the importance of ventilation, it can be a place where further infection is controlled because of the hard work of the schools. And it's safer than children being at the mall, going on the street, playing with friends. The other thing that I always think is very important, and it took me a long time to really get this into my brain, is that there's a lot of infections that are asymptomatic. So we have to behave very carefully, whether we are at home, at school, or on the street. The last part of your question is the issue of the stress that schools are experiencing. And I think that that has to be part of our equation of care, of support, of working with community, of understanding the contexts are different. So at the moment, the infection is higher perhaps in the Northern Cape, I think in the Eastern Cape. What we have to do is to give schools the discretion to manage as best as they can and be accountable for how they manage. But what space they have, what the levels of infection are, what the levels of anxiety are, they call it the risk differentiated, risk adjusted strategy. Yeah. And the minister was supporting that last night. Free State is having problems at the moment. Yeah. Let's support those schools that are infected and affected rather than...
I mean, these are real things, and I mean, now there's also talk of a new variant of concern that's been discovered here in South Africa, and we won't get into that because we're not necessarily the medical experts here, and I know there's also questions about whether we should even make the vaccination for younger learners, because, you know, if we're seeing infections taking place at schools, should we open it up to the under 18s? But let's not go there. Let's rather have that with a medical expert in terms of who looks at vaccines and epidemiology and all of those things. We'll talk about that. But one thing that really worries me, and I know that, you want to comment on it. Go for it. What do you want to say, Prof?
I just wanted to say, Leanne, that the one thing that we've got to remember is that all of our teachers were offered the vaccination, and
Indeed.
the vast majority of teachers have taken it.
Yes.
That also makes schools safer places, not that people won't be infected, but they won't be as seriously infected. And I think that teachers who haven't yet taken the vaccination need to see the levels of serious infection dropping and take the vaccine.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the alarming numbers that came through, and the minister spoke about this too, and I think we need to dedicate some time to it, is some of the figures that have come out, and I mean, I'm just highlighting Gauteng because this is a massive one in terms of teenage pregnancies in the country. And I know that she said she's going to intensify the implementation of the Comprehensive Sexuality Education. But I mean, when you look at the numbers, and again, let me remind South Africans, because these were released about 2 weeks ago, 23,226 teenage pregnancies were recorded in Gauteng between April 2020 and March 21 this year. This, of course, is where it becomes even more alarming. Almost 3,000 girls between the age of 10 and 19 chose to terminate their pregnancies, and 934 girls between 10 and 14 actually gave birth. I mean, these numbers are frightening, they are disturbing, and they are worrying. I don't know what other word to throw in there with it. But this is the danger where, obviously, you know that they weren't at school, walking around, doing whatever, and also there's the issue of gender-based violence that is taking place as well. I mean, there's a lot of avenues we need to look at this, but this is a very, very worrying trend. What do you have to say about this?
It's extremely worrying in terms of gender issues and in power relations that are imbalanced. Who is impregnating these young girls? Because that would be, and I know that the legal position is that if both of the parties involved are under 18, it's not statutory rape. But what are the power relations at play? Who is going to be looking after these young children who themselves now have young children? So the minister is correct that all of us have to step up and make sure that learners are given the not only knowledge, but the personal confidence as women to be able to make choices. And that's the concern in terms of gender here. Were these choices, were the young girls able to make informed choices? Did they have the information? Were they looking for affection? What are the emotional needs that are happening here, as well as the knowledge that is needed? So the minister is correct that we need to have age-appropriate education on issues related to sexuality. It has to be more than biology. It has to be about responsibilities. It has to be about being loved and giving love. And that comes from school, it comes from home, it comes from community, but it should be a matter of extreme concern to all of us that such young girls are falling pregnant.
Yeah, and certainly the blame should not be wholly put on the shoulders of these young girls, because I know, there's been a lot of talk about the young girls and being irresponsible and, why they're doing this. This is not just something that is their fault. I mean, as you mentioned in your answer, there are so many aspects around this and so much support that appears to be missing in young children in South Africa's lives, that something like this can happen. And the young boys have to be held as responsible for this. I mean, I know that there's the Comprehensive Sexuality Education that has always been around, and it's a very controversial matter that's been met with resistance, particularly from parents and religious groups as well. But what training tools should teachers be provided with to be able to adequately provide learners with some accurate information?
The Comprehensive Sexuality program that the DBE has produced was very carefully put together and understood the challenges that teachers have in explaining some matters which people regard as personal and intimate, which is why the DBE gave teachers as much support as possible with what they call the scripted plans, so that teachers get guidance. If there's something that's difficult to talk about, the lesson plan helps them with that. Now, I'm not a sexuality education expert, and I have not studied the sexuality comprehensive plan. But what I do know is that when it was introduced last time, there was a massive campaign of disinformation, frightening parents to say this is going to make your young girls want to go out and get pregnant, and all kinds of really dangerous nonsense. And this was spread through different social groupings, including through some churches. And I think that we have to say to parents, wait, get a hold on this. Look at the material, discuss it with the schools, think about how the school can help you as a parent in making sure that your child is exposed to age-appropriate information that's comprehensive, that doesn't just talk about biology. Biology is important, understanding how the body works is important, but understanding intimacy understanding our need for intimacy, understanding what's appropriate, understanding what informs the choices that we make. All of that, parents need to not just listen to the alarm mongers who are running this massive campaign. Let's look at the material carefully, because as you say, these figures are a wake-up call.
Yeah, they certainly are. Professor, thanks so much for talking to us. I know there's a wide range of issues that needs to be discussed around this, but this is touching the tip of the iceberg and those that just stand out for us. So, Professor Mary Metcalfe, Senior Research Associate at the University of Johannesburg, giving an analysis on just some of the matters raised by the Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, during her briefing yesterday on the department's response to the COVID-19 pandemic.